Good afternoon and welcome to Dateline New Haven and WNHH-FM, New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Paul Bass, inviting you to join us in looking behind the headlines and the story that make our community tick. Well, there's one big story happening in the world right now, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We are looking on, throughout the world, we are looking on in horror, outrage, but also awe at what is happening. Week 2 is beginning today of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. I keep saying Soviet Union. By Russia. And an amazing feat that no one could have told, and a compelling story that is just gripping everyone's attention about the way the Ukrainian people, a country of 41 million, is it? Fighting back against Russia. It was thought they could just roll in with tanks and take over the country and take away their freedom. Fighting back underground, craft breweries turning into Molotov cocktail factories. And that's what we're going to talk about today with two people whose lives are directly affected by this. A Ukrainian-American member of our community here on Dateline New Haven, Myron Melnick, who has been sort of the voice of the local Ukrainian community, sort of the contact person to the outside world, the way to put it, right, at the Ukrainian church on George Street. And then Oleksii Antonuk, who is, he's not Ukrainian-American, right? You're Ukrainian.
Yeah, I'm Ukrainian.
Who's from Colombia?
Yes.
A village or town?
It's a town. In
Ukraine, and he's a sophomore at Yale studying global affairs and economics. And they're going to tell us what's going on now, how their lives are affected, and what we as a nation, as a community nation, can do to help the brave people in Ukraine. I want to talk about all sorts of serious stuff because it's not funny when tanks come in and bombs and you're blowing up buildings in major cities, sending people underground. More than 1 million refugees already. Lots of people dead. But what struck me so much before we went on the air, and I was talking to Oleksii, is we were laughing. So I want to get at that. How do we laugh? Because there's a lot of laughing going on. It's not because the president of Ukraine was a comedian. It's because amid all this horror and tragedy, there have been out-of-context humorous missteps by sort of the villain in the story, Vladimir Putin and his soldiers. You want to tell me a little bit about that, Oleksii? Tell me about the video you were showing me, the first video you showed me.
Yeah, so
get close to the mic.
Thank you so much for the introduction, first of all. And the video that I showed you was how Ukrainian farmers are stealing Russian tanks. So you have a battle going on, and then Russians abandon their vehicles and flee to the forest. And the Ukrainian army withdraws to regroup, and then Ukrainian farmers come with tractors and just tow Russian tanks to their backyard. Because, it's like, it's cool to have a Russian tank in your backyard. And there have already 3 instances of that. And once there was like a $5 million worth air defense system that was towed by Ukrainian farmers.
From where?
I'm not sure the location.
And then this comes up on YouTube.
Yes, this is on all Ukrainian news. That is just so funny. And
the Russians did believe, am I not wrong, that on day one they were going to knock out all the communications, right?
Yes.
They thought on day one they would stop you from getting your message of what's happening on the ground. They thought they weren't going to tell the Russians themselves that their families had soldiers there dying, right? That's just getting out now. They thought they were going to take care of your President Zelensky right away and just kill him, right? So he wouldn't be able to talk to the world. The electricity would be knocked out. But now we're getting to see this stuff in real time.
Yes, exactly. And Russians, Putin is decreasing his ability to information and control Russia. Is that he's already acknowledged, if I'm not mistaken, almost 500 deaths of Russian soldiers, which is a gross underestimate.
The most since Chechnya, yeah.
Yes, Ukrainians and U.S. intelligence estimates, they're approximately the same. At this point, maybe like 7,000, which is a lot. That's more than America lost 4,500 soldiers in Iraq throughout the entire war. Russia has already lost 6, 7, or 8,000 soldiers.
Wow. And as you said, you're holding tanks on the farms. What happens to a tank when it gets brought to a farm?
And the Ukrainians, according to Ukrainian laws, is that if you find a treasury, which is like a treasury which is very expensive, Ukrainian state tax agency would need to tax you. Mm-hmm. However, they released a statement that if you, by any chance, get to steal Russian tank, we will not tax that. We will not consider it as an income.
Okay, so, I hate to be weird about this humor question, but that was a statement put out by a government official, right?
Yes,
so a government official found a way to find humor as bombs are raining on your communities. People are dying, and people are rushing for lives either the borders and subways. Which official was that? Who said that? Tax official?
There was a state tax agency. I'm not sure the official names exactly.
So is humor helping the Ukrainians in this war, along with the weapons and the international support and the sanctions and the miscalculations by Putin? Is humor helping?
Well, humor is essential to dealing with any tragedy, even if the tragedy is as terrible as it is now. Humor helps to go through that, and it makes people laugh. It makes people understand how actually not professional, not good Russian soldiers are.
It shows that they're not. Does it help you get the idea that Goliath can be beaten? If you can take down, like there's a famous blues song by Big Mama Thornton, "You ain't so big, you're just tall. That's all." Like, is that part? Information's a weapon, and is it true that from the grassroots to the presidency, Ukraine is using humor among other important tools as a weapon? Is that a fair statement?
Exactly. Like even this example is a tractor. So imagine like you have a Ukrainian, all Ukrainians know about this, and the next time Russian soldiers enter their village or town, they'll not be thinking this like some super professional killing military force. They will be thinking about tractors stealing Russian tanks, and they'll be like, oh, we can oppose them too. We can resist them.
And the resistance is amazing. I just have to say, I mean, we're in awe in the world that you folks are standing up and it's a weekend and they haven't taken over.
Yes, exactly. Well, Putin really underestimated Ukrainian resistance, and that is why he's losing now.
And do you think, how do you think what's your sense of where it's going the second week? So finally in the South, they claim they've taken control of one coastal city in the South, Kherson. I don't know if I'm saying it right. Ukraine has not acknowledged that they've taken over. They just said they took over the administration building, but they say the government's still functioning, right?
Most likely it is being taken over at this point. It was captured. At the same time, it can always be recaptured. And even if it cannot be recaptured, you can still control the movement. And it's been an entire week of war, and they captured only one city. And that city is 200,000 people, which is also not a big city.
Out of 41 million.
Yes, exactly.
And the will of the soldiers is interesting. So you were telling me some stories, too, about Russian soldiers, right? We're reading some of that. They don't really want to fight, right?
Yeah.
They're related to people in Ukraine. They didn't realize, one of them claimed, I didn't realize I was going to be sent to Ukraine, which was kind of odd, but...
Yeah, there are... Actually, Putin fell prey to his own propaganda. First of all, Putin's been saying that, Ukrainians and Russians are the same people. Always, almost all the Russians believe that. And then you say, soldiers, go kill Ukrainians. But then Ukrainians are the same people as you, so you don't want to kill them. Then secondly, he's been denying the possibility of war. And he's been saying we only having trainings, nothing's going to happen. And then he gives a sudden order to invade. And you as a soldier, you're expecting to go back home in a week. And now you have to invade and fight Ukrainians. Like,
so, you're Alexei, you're in Yale studying. You're a sophomore.
Yes.
How does that feel, being in a dorm room while this is going on?
It feels, of course, there is some sort of, I would even say, shame and regret that I'm not with my friends and family. I'm not with the Ukrainian people physically. However, here I'm trying to compensate for it by fundraising for Ukrainian military, by organizing different fundraising events. We had a Yale rally for Ukraine.
Yep.
Last week we had 400 people. I'm trying to advocate with US officials. So
tell me about that. How are you doing that?
During the rally for Ukraine, we had Senator Blumenthal and Congressman Rosa DeLorme, and Mayor Eliker. And we've been trying to show them how much, not just Ukrainians, but how much the entire America supports Ukraine.
And how much family do you have back there?
Everyone.
So what is everyone? Like two parents,
it's my mom, my dad.
Siblings?
No siblings.
Are you in touch with them?
Yeah, so...
and how are they doing?
Every day. My mom is in Poland at this point.
Mom made it to Poland?
Yes. My dad is staying home.
He's under 60?
Yes, he's under 60.
I think you're not allowed to leave now.
The main reason why he's staying home is that he just... Like, his parents are home. And
so your grandparents are there?
Yes, my grandparents are there. And he does not want to leave his land. Like, why should he leave his land? It's his land.
Has anyone made it into their town yet?
No. We live in Western Ukraine. And so there have been 4 missile attacks. And that's pretty much it.
That's a big deal for missile attacks. Like I was telling you, I walk around here every day thinking I'm walking this building. I'm not worried that they're going to blow up that Yale building. I'm not worried, like I'm going to go home and have to go suddenly underground for weeks with water and bread. What happened with those 4 missile attacks in your town?
They attacked the airfield nearby. We have a military airfield. And at the beginning, Russia's been trying to take down Ukrainian Air Force. They miserably failed, but they did attack my city's airfield for
And we
missiles.
talked about this before I got onto Myron. We talked about the airfield and the air capacity of Ukraine. So we're looking at this convoy lined up. You said it's more like 20 or 30 miles, not 40, outside Kyiv. But it's kind of stuck, right? Because some of the vehicles break down. Didn't you lift the bridge, which wasn't so hard. You just lift the bridge, right? But you said that they are being, and also farmers are stealing some of the tanks. But how have they attacked from the air? Is there a reason to try to can they cripple that convoy with air power?
Yeah, well, we are doing it right now.
Was it drone attacks? Or?
It was drone attacks, air attacks, artillery attacks.
And what are they doing?
Mostly like taking down. Ukrainians have been focusing a lot on Russian logistics and fuel, and because Russian logistics are terrible, Russia cannot get fuel to their tanks, and so Ukrainians have been focusing on taking down fuel, and they took down a train with fuel. It was a very, very long train. They destroyed it, and now all of that 40 or 20 mile column, they just cannot move. They don't have fuel.
Is that kind of funny about the convoy being stuck?
Yeah, there is, because also like that convoy, it's not that there is like just one convoy, 20 mile convoy. There were like 30 convoys, but because of getting stalled, because of fuel shortage, it became like a traffic jam of just one convoy.
By 30, you mean coming from different directions?
No, they were coming like from to the same direction, but like separate convoys.
Meaning separate groups of...
Yeah, separate groups.
And they all got stuck like a traffic jam.
Yes.
Is the traffic jam funny?
Well, it's super funny because like they just cannot move. Essentially, it takes one vehicle to get stalled or to get broken, and the entire convoy is stopped unless an evacuator comes and takes that vehicle. But for an evacuator to come, you need to have space.
For what to come?
Evacuator, like a tow trucker. For a tow trucker to come, you need to have space. To have space, you need to move, but you don't. But you need space to move. So this is like.
So are you not?
It's terrible for
I know
Russia.
you're obviously very worried about them getting in. Are you not that worried about the convoy? You can laugh at the convoy.
Well, Ukraine has been managing very well. I'm gonna say that. Of course, we cannot destroy the entire convoy. Of course, this convoy will be used to kill Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian civilians. But we are doing our best to make sure that as few of vehicles come to Ukraine from this convoy.
And we're all watching on, as I said, in appreciation, in awe, and in support and love to what's happening with the Ukrainian people fighting for their freedom. We're talking about that on Dateline New Haven, WNHH-FM, New Haven's home for community radio, 103.5 FM live streamed at newhaven.org. Myron Melnick, you've been helping keep us all aware of what's going on there. You kind of kicked into action right away because you've been doing this for years. Since 2014, there's been a war in eastern Ukraine, and you're a Vietnam veteran because you've been in the country how long? Your whole life? Or
I came here as a young boy.
when did you come?
In the 50s.
As how old were you?
2.
2. Okay. And now you came to New Haven?
No, I'm originally from upstate New York, but I came to New Haven to study at Yale when I was in college.
And what'd you study?
I studied applied mathematics, operations research.
Wow. And if you can get a little close to the mic, if you don't mind. Pam McNerney says, thank you for this. Most interesting, inspiring. We must do more to help. I'm right with you, Pam. We're going to get to that a little later in the show. So, Myron, you've been in New Haven since when? You served in Vietnam. Was that after Yale?
Yes.
And so you served this country, and you settled in New Haven.
And I settled in New Haven. I met my wife here, and the rest is history.
And you became it's a St. Thomas's Church? St. Michael?
St. Michael's Ukrainian Catholic Church. It's on George Street.
Yep. Do you still have the museum there? I remember during
right next door.
The 1988. Remember when all the ethnic societies came together, historical societies, for the celebration of the Green? The old New Haven Independent, we read about that.
Yeah, it was a celebration of the millennial of Ukrainian Christianity in 988. Okay. So it goes back to 1988.
That was also the year New Haven celebrated its 350th birthday, and all the ethnic historical societies came together to create the citywide coalition of ethnic historical societies. We all came on the green. Do you remember that?
Yes.
That's very nice. Yes. So you've been a stalwart of that community. You've been raising awareness since 2014 about the war. You've worked with Senator Blumenthal to get injured Ukrainian soldiers here to Yale New Haven to get treatment they can't get there.
Yes, we with the help of Senator Blumenthal, we had legislation added to the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, which is the main funding act for Pentagon operations all over the world, U.S. and all over the world. And there's a paragraph in there, and it's every year. There's one this year also because it's an annual authorization. There's a paragraph there, extensive one, about assistance for Ukraine. And in that section of the NDAA, we had a paragraph specifying that for those soldiers who can't get proper medical treatment in Ukraine, severely wounded, they could come here to the United States on a case-by-case basis to get specialized care. And there have been a number of soldiers that have come. 3 of them have come to New Haven. We worked with other organizations as well as with Yale to bring them here. And so 2 were treated and went back, and 1 unfortunately died here.
So, Myron, when this invasion started, other than to the rest of Ukraine, well, how did you react at first? What was your first thought, and how did you kick into gear to make sure you fulfill a role in our community?
Well, it was very clear from the outset that this was Russian aggression, and the way they did it was very surreptitious. They didn't send in soldiers. They had little green men. They exploited any differences in the population and all of a sudden just took control of all the organs of power. And the main thing they did was they built up their military presence.
Oh, you're talking about the Donbass. I'm talking about this time. Last week when the invasion happened. No, we all talked a lot about what they did, the other invasion, the other incursion, and how we were trying to have even the U.S. government broadcast every step as they were doing it, sending people in, creating the pretext so that there wouldn't be a way for the world to be confused. But what about you personally? When this invasion happened, what first went through your mind, this latest invasion a week ago, and what was your first task in terms of community understanding?
Well, it was disbelief and despair because, as you remember, leading up to this, President Putin, Lavrov, others just denied that there was going to be an invasion, that these were just exercises that were going to expire, and there was absolute denial many, many times that there would be no invasion of Ukraine. We didn't quite believe it. We thought perhaps they would just limit themselves to the southeastern part of Ukraine, the area that has been in conflict since 2014. And we were just amazed that it was a full-blown invasion of the country.
Well, it was interesting to me to listen to Alexei talk about when you feel a sense of guilt some people have. I don't know if it's guilt or not, that, your family's back there and you're not. You find the things you can do here, which I actually think are very important to the cause. So I was kind of interested in the role you play since you take a leadership role here. It's been now a half century or more since you've been there, but you're still playing a role here to help people back in your native land.
Well, I've been back several times, so it's not like I haven't been there since.
What I mean is that here you're sort of the voice of New Haven's Ukrainian community.
It's personal because we do have relatives in Ukraine. In fact, my wife has cousins who are in Kyiv. One is a university professor and the other works for the government, the Department of Agriculture. And they're originally from Western Ukraine, from the Ternopil region, but they moved to Kyiv to pursue their careers about 10, 11 years ago. And they chose, when this thing started, they chose to stay in Kyiv, and their kids, of course, recommended strongly that they come west because it's more secure there, it's more rural, it's not really symbolic in the sense of you have, the capital and second largest city and the third largest city. The cities in the west are relatively small in comparison to these first 3 that I just mentioned. But Ostap and Lyuba refused to go, and their answer was, we're here for 10, 12 years, we have friends, they're staying, we're staying with them. So we're in touch with them. I spoke with them not yesterday, but the day before, and they were in bunkers a lot of the time. So during the day, it's a bit more secure, and they go out. Not that they wander far from their apartment. They live in a big complex, and they're always close so that if necessary, they can go down into the basement of their apartment.
And at least on this stage of the invasion in the war, if I have it correct, because they haven't been able to invade physically with their troops in the city. It's been air attacks at night that have been the biggest problem. And obviously during the day you have to deal with saboteurs and all that trying to kill the president. But I mean, so people are going underground. So more than 1 million people have left. It's a refugee crisis. People are going underground. We saw those incredible pictures this morning and last night about people staying in, 3 to a mattress in the subways, women and children. Is there a sense of how much longer they can hold out in terms of food and water as the electricity gets hit?
There's concern talking to my cousins in Kyiv because, as you know, when you have this kind of dangerous situation, store shelves are not being replenished, and there's fear that if they knock out a key part of the infrastructure, water may be hard to get by, and so they're worried about
what kind of do you know what kind of plans are in place when you talk to your relatives? Like how many weeks? I know there's some amazing number of loaves of bread the other day to get everybody. What is going to be the ability if it goes into a guerrilla underground battle if they do actually manage to get into Kyiv and Kharkov and those kind of places?
It's a good question. I think people are preparing for that if it comes down to that, and it looks like it will. But the expectation is that, these are civilian populations and that somehow there has to be a way to get this kind of basic...
Are there major storage? Do you know if there's major storage going on, like weeks worth of supplies?
Ukraine has been working on it for a long time. It was clear that when the war began, something like that could happen. So Ukrainians are trying to get as much food, as much provision as possible for storage. So even if Kyiv is taken under siege and there are no ways where you can get humanitarian assistance, there will not be a big problem for like 2 weeks, I suppose, 3. I'm not sure, but it is a long time.
And then just as you said, part of the idea of humor is to take down Goliath as menacing and all fearful. While that is a very real danger on Ukraine's side, there's also the real danger, am I wrong, because this is what you study, global strategy, that if Putin's, even though he has hundreds of thousands of troops, if not only are they having logistical problems, but if they don't have the desire to fight. Because this is really, so Myron said that he kind of still assuming it's going to turn into that the Russians will get in, it's going to be an underground guerrilla fight. Are we sure that's going to happen? Is there a way for this to end without that stalled convoy making it into Kyiv?
Well, so far it seems it's been a week of war, and Russia has taken only one city, which is also like a 200,000 people city, not a big city, and they fought for 7 days for that city. Would they be able to take Kharkiv and Kyiv, which are much larger cities and much more well defended? Well, unlikely. The thing about Russian military is that it has already lost around 7,000, 8,000 troops, and it's just deaths or captured. And then you have
I'm sorry, that includes captured?
Yes,
so that's not analogous to the 4,500 Americans who died in Iraq. You said there were 4,500 Americans who died.
Well, captured, there are like 400 captured, let's put it that way. So we can say that there are 6,500 Russian soldiers dead, or 7,000. It's hard to say at this point, but it's around that number.
But more already than all of the Iraq war.
Yes, it's already much more. And so you have a lot of people dead or captured, and there are also a lot of people wounded. I would suppose the ratio is like 1 to 3, 1 to 4. So you pretty much have 30,000 Russian troops already been not deployable. They're either in hospitals or are dead or captured.
And then among the rest, again, we talked about, it's clear from what little we could tell, because it's hard to know exactly what's true, that they don't have the will to fight that Ukrainians have, and that goes a long way.
Yes, because like there was no strong propaganda campaign for that. It is not their land. In general, Russian people, they are not especially willing to fight. When they see danger, they always escape. Ukrainians, like, they just naturally, they have more of this warrior type of like defending my ideas, my values. Russians have less of that. Also,
they're not fighting for anything. They're not fighting something they believe in.
Yeah.
So how far can that go? It reminds me a little bit about, I know it's an odd analogy, when Ukrainians prevail, it's a little bit like when the wall fell in Berlin.
But it's already clear Russia lost.
We believed for decades that wall could never come down. It was fearsome. And then people just climbed up. And it came down. And if it was just assumed that, of course, hundreds of thousands of Russian troops right outside your border, there's no way they couldn't just come in and take over. Well, if they couldn't, that was that sort of that idea the emperor has no clothes. But Putin was stationed in East Germany when the wall came down. He always thought it was one of the biggest mistakes to let that happen. He's kind of playing it out. What is Putin's endgame here? What strategic options does he have besides someone killing him or deposing him to stop him from just escalating it? What do you think, Byron?
Well, I'm not as optimistic as Alexei. When I was in the Army, I was an order of battle analyst in the intelligence.
For U.S. Army?
Yes.
You were a
And,
battle analyst for U.S. intelligence in Vietnam. Wow.
and when you
Could it be
conduct,
generational that Alexei's, how old are you? You're like 20,
19.
19, and you're like 70?
yes, when war begins, the first order of business is to control the the skies.
Mm-hmm.
That's the universally accepted doctrine. All armies behave that way. And this is a severe shortcoming for the Ukrainian army. They do not have a substantial air force. They do have jet fighters, and they have been able to take down some planes and helicopters because they have some anti-aircraft weapons, Stinger missiles primarily. But I'll give you an example. This convoy that is now stringing along the highway, if Ukraine had sufficient air power, they could easily
Or
destroy.
NATO could do it in a day, but then would Putin
They
make
could-
good on the nuclear retaliation?
No, we're talking about
No, I'm saying Ukraine could do it on their own if they had to.
yes.
But NATO has the capability, but NATO's not
NATO
gonna get
has the
involved.
capability. Ukraine does not. I mean, there you can see them. I mean, this is an easy target for an air force, and it's not being done. Now, maybe they are holding back. Maybe they have other plans down the road as this convoy moves closer to Kyiv. But
So what do you take from that? You think that means eventually you get in, or is Alexei right that they can't get in because it's just a hopeless traffic jam? They're poached here. They're all stuck. You think eventually they can get in?
yes, they can get in, and I think what they're going to do is they're going to encircle Kyiv, and it's going to be a war of attrition. It's going to be a siege, and the longer it drags on, it's interesting. It actually could be to Ukraine's advantage because Russian morale will
Right.
reduce, will sap. You will have more protests in Russia. The sanctions will take a bigger bite than they have so far because they're relatively new.
Both sides are going to see what they can hold out
Yeah.
among it. So, but is it fair to say that both of you agree that it's not a given that if it gets to the siege and that kind of warfare that the Russians necessarily win because of the lack of morale and the international pressure? But it does seem like you have two different takes that might be generational about the threat of that convoy. Is that fair to
Well,
say?
I agree with Miron in that there most likely will be an encirclement of Kyiv. But it's the question of Russia possesses the necessary capabilities to destroy Ukrainian military if it really wants to, and if it's ready to pay in terms of human lives and in terms of economic cost. Because like one loss of air defense system, it's like a few $million lost, and it's not that Russia has a lot of $1 million.
But do you feel
extra-
like Putin, though, is willing to
and,
break the bank, right?
Well, to a certain extent. Putin, so the current war, why I think that actually Ukraine is very well positioned not to... So the most important thing is Ukraine cannot win Russia, cannot defeat Russia, but Ukraine can make sure that it is not defeated. And if Ukraine is not defeated,
That's so
it means a
interesting.
defeat to Russia.
Can I slow on that for a second? Can I just focus on that? Ukraine cannot defeat Russia, but Ukraine can make sure that Ukraine is not defeated.
Yes, that Russia...
Can you explain that a little bit?
So for Russia, the win would be occupation of Ukraine and then stabilization, and that people believe in the proper government. That's the win for Russia. We'll be taking over all of the Ukrainian cities quite bloodlessly. Ukrainians can make sure that this doesn't happen, and they can inflict heavy damages. They already done.
So you're saying make sure that occupation doesn't take hold.
Yes, first of all, they can make sure that occupation does not happen.
Mhm.
If you look, Russia has already lost 20% of its invading force in terms of man, and has already lost 5% of its invading equipment. That is a lot of things. And yes, Ukrainians lost a bit more equipment, but they lost fewer men. And it just seems that even if Russian encircles Kyiv, takes the siege, then what? Ukrainians will not give Kyiv Ukrainians will resist
It's kind of
till
interesting
the very
because
end.
Putin keeps looking back at the Cold War. He's not looking back at Afghanistan, right? Isn't that the relevant historical precedent when you try to occupy a country and it doesn't work, even over decades, if they don't want
To a
to be
certain
occupied?
extent, to a certain extent, but the difference between Ukraine and in Afghanistan is that Afghanistan didn't have that strong military at the time.
Ukraine's
Ukraine
a
has
modern
Ukraine has
Western
a
democracy.
standing professional military.
Well,
And-
Afghanistan did not have a population that
Correct.
was really willing to fight. That's
Correct.
the bottom line.
Right. That
The
was an
military
insurgency.
is part of that population.
And they had a civil war there, and you don't have civil war. And we're talking about the invasion, the war in Ukraine with Myron Melnick and Alexei Onkenuk,
Yes.
okay, who's a student at Yale and really, really interested and smart about this whole thing. So what next? What can our community do, if anything, to help the brave people of Ukraine hold back an invasion?
We had a Zoom call yesterday with our congressional representatives, all 5 of them, and that subject came up, and there was some discussion about bolstering the air defenses, because that is a weakness. It's acknowledged by the Pentagon. In fact, Pentagon estimates are fairly gloomy longer term. Immediately, they're encouraged by the resistance. They're encouraged by the high morale of the military as well as the people. But the question is, how long can that be sustained, given that there are still a lot of Russian forces that have not entered Ukraine, and there's still a lot of heavy weaponry that has not come into Ukraine. So right now, the perception is it's a kind of a standoff, but the sense that I get, and a lot of other people feel, is that Putin has not really played all his cards, and he is not about to back off and say, well, I have a little resistance here, and I'm not, we have to find some way to de-escalate. Maybe if Ukraine agrees to be neutral, maybe that'll be an off-ramp.
But they already did. They did before the invasion. When the phone calls, Zelensky got the phone call that he wasn't going to be accepted into NATO, he told Putin we'll be neutral, right?
No.
I got that wrong? Okay.
Yes. The whole discussion was about the right of Ukraine to decide what they wanted to do.
Right.
But there was no declaration of neutrality.
But I thought he sent a message, at least according to the Times, he sent a message saying when NATO said no.
One of his ambassadors from the UK sent that message.
I see.
And it was deemed not to be an official
Putin wasn't
message.
interested anyway, right? Putin doesn't want just neutrality. He wants to take over the country.
Right.
Do you think there's a way to stop Putin from within Russia if you continue to demoralize the population and, stretch the oligarchs' financial situation personally, but also...
This subject came up yesterday, and it came up on Sunday when we had our rally. I think the U.S. should be able to do a lot more to provide real truth and facts to the Russian population. Because
so you think they should be involved? Because, you guys are the best, right? Zelensky and the Ukrainian people right now are the best at winning the propaganda war.
But that's outside of Russia.
Is it? I thought you were also getting stuff through Telegram into Russia.
Well, some of it is coming in, but we have to remember the media is controlled
Right,
entirely.
I know. That's what the surprise story has been. Maybe it's triumphalist and too early, but the Washington Post and other places, they're saying that the word's now getting in.
It is getting
Russia.
in mostly through the social media and through kind of informal
So you're saying the U.S. can play a
methods.
role in helping with the propaganda war. How specifically could they get word into Russia that the way Ukrainians can't?
I would say they should explore how to use social media more effectively.
To get past the
get-
Russian, because
to
Russians
get
are pretty
past-
good at blocking.
Yeah, well, you can block something that's up, but you can keep something up for a day or two before it's discovered, before it can be
And
taken
then tell me
down.
about air support. What kind of specific air support can we give?
One area that's very promising is that Poland has some obsolete MiGs, MiG-8s.
And tell
And-
people what that is.
That's a former Soviet jet fighter plane.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Now, of course, Poland is part of NATO, so they're using American jets and standardizing on American equipment, and all of Europe, all of NATO is doing that. So these MiGs are sitting there. They need a little maintenance. But Ukraine does have pilots, and they have pilots that are trained to fly these MiGs. Because remember, these MiGs were part of, what was Soviet Union, and even after the
That would be
Soviet
an irony if Soviet fighter jets were used to stop the Russian
Well,
invasion.
that would
So
add-
why is that not happening? Is it because NATO's worried about crossing a Rubicon that would unleash a broader fight?
The subject came up, and our representative Courtney, who is on the House
Joe
Armed
Courtney,
Services Committee, mentioned that this is a possibility. There's some issues there because these planes have not been maintained, number one. Number two, how do you get agreement? Because I assume that these are not just Polish property, they may be NATO property. I'm not sure when.
And is the
Poland-
U.S. role as being a leading partner in NATO to push for allowing them to be used?
I think it would be a very proper role.
What's the barrier? Am I right that the barrier is crossing a Rubicon where NATO is more involved in the military aspect of the confrontation? So then
Well-
Putin would say, now I'm okay to attack.
Well, that's not how we should view it. What
No, I'm
US
just asking, what is the resistance at the moment? Why is it not happening?
I'm not sure the details. I know that it's being considered as a
And you think it might be
possibility.
partly logistic because they're old and they need to be fixed?
It might be partly that, and it may be what you mentioned. Again, I'm not part of the discussions here on this, but it's no different than the U.S. providing Stinger missiles or javelins or other weapons. Those are coming from the United States, and the United States is part of NATO. So why?
So then maybe the Rubicon has been crossed.
Well, that's how it should be viewed.
Although if NATO jets came and attacked the convoy, that would escalate.
Well, these are
Right.
not NATO jets anymore.
Right.
These are jets that have been decommissioned and
Mhm.
could be maintained and repaired.
That's interesting.
And Ukraine has the expertise to fly them.
And
There
that
are,
border is open. So,
Yeah.
What can the average listener do? Is there anything they can do to help with the cause?
Well, first of all, is that donate money to the Ukrainian humanitarian relief, Ukrainian military, and it can be $1, $5, $20, $100, like any amount would matter.
So send money.
Yeah, send money.
For what specifically?
Anything you would like to send money for. It could be refugee support. It could be humanitarian relief. It could be support for war clinics. It could be directly to the Ukrainian military.
And can I ask you to text me
Yes,
3
I
links,
will text
and we'll
you
put
the
that in
link.
the article. So if people want to read this article later today or tomorrow when it gets published, we'll put in some links that you can provide us. Harry says the U.S. has retired F-16 fleet collecting dust that we can send. Question is, why aren't we? Our retired fleet is a world beyond what Europe has. So this is way beyond my expertise, but since you were a military analyst, what's he talking about?
well, he's talking about obsolete jets that right now are not in use.
Where are they?
I'm not sure, but
But why would we want to, if we're going to provide jets, why wouldn't we use the modern ones rather than the obsolete ones?
good question, but the modern ones are maybe not available. I'm not sure. But this area of bolstering air defenses is critical, I feel, and it could be a turning point because up to now, Ukraine has availed itself very, very well, but the heavy lifting really hasn't started yet, in my opinion.
Is that the way you see it too?
Well, I would disagree with it. From what I know, a few days ago, the Pentagon official, some newspaper reported, their Pentagon sources said that 2/3 of Russian available troops were already engaged, and that was a few days ago. So now we can expect it probably like 90%.
And they're still
This
not
is
in
first
control
time.
after.
Secondly, they're using the most advanced jets they have. They're using Su-35s, which are like almost a generation younger than most Ukrainian jets. Thirdly, the Russian Force Guards tank army, the most elite tank army in the world, is currently being engaged near Kharkiv, and it's actually being defeated by Ukrainians.
Yeah.
And and there were also Russia employed heavy modern tanks like T-90. On social media, there have already been reports about 6 T-90s being destroyed, abandoned, or captured by Ukrainians. And so it seems that Russia has already used a lot of the most modern equipment it could ever do. And also the cruise missiles, they already used most of their available cruise missiles. And
Do you remember we were
they
all
were
scared
very
about the cruise
advanced.
missiles in the 80s? That was the big fear then under
Yes,
Reagan.
so they used
So
all
what
of
about
them.
nuclear weapons? Is there a real danger of that with Putin? Someone was saying to me the other day who knows about these issues, he said one thing people don't count on is even if Putin gave an order, that doesn't mean it'd be carried out. Once before, Russia had a nuclear order that wasn't carried out.
Here's the danger. The Russian order of battle allows for use of tactical nuclear weapons as a last resort. This is something that the U.S. Army does not have in their order of battle and in the way they conduct wars and conflicts. But the Russians do, and it's written down. And the concern is that if you're pushed into a corner, Putin right now is very unpredictable. He's very committed.
Do you think he has
to
the
this.
support of his command staff that were carried out? I think in both countries, U.S. and Russia, there's this sense that generals aren't necessarily going to do it, right?
Hopefully you're right.
But maybe, what do I know? You know the stuff I don't. I'm asking. Like, how worried each of you that there might be, that this could go nuclear? And then, of course, that's not funny in the least. Right.
I think there's a possibility. It's not a major probability at this point, but I think there is a possibility if things deteriorate far enough, and hopefully we'll never get to that point. But the Russian army is prepared to do that. You know, they just had exercises recently to, I think it was more.
Do you think that, I
PR.
guess this is hard for us to tell, that after you get past Putin, the level of command, is it the same commitment in, is it really, I never got the sense that it's a cultural commitment to refighting the Cold War and undoing the humiliation of the Cold War. I never got the sense, but I'm not there, that this is some kind of widespread feeling in Russia, this desire to recreate the Soviet Union. I mean, am I wrong about that?
It's not a widespread feeling. You're absolutely right. The Russian people don't want this. If they knew really what was going on.
And militaries tend to be pretty attuned to the popular
well, again,
feeling.
Putin and his contacts, the people that he deals with day to day, it's a very opaque system. We don't have press conferences. They don't provide information. No one really knows who's in favor, who's not in favor. But look, Putin decided to invade. There was nobody in his inner circle that resisted it apparently effectively.
Right.
And so this war started, even though it was not expected at this scale.
Mm-hmm. And we're talking about the unfolding crisis, the invasion, the war in Ukraine from the Russian invasion with Myron Melnick and Alexei Antonuk, who are, Alexei is from Ukraine. He's studying at Yale. Myron was born there, and he's a leader of our local community. So, you know, one thing that strikes you when I hear this conversation, as I mentioned earlier, the generational slight difference between you guys obviously agree and you're on the same side. You think about everything. But younger people, I see this so often, our generation, Myron, and, you know, you see how smart Alexei is, how much information he already has.
I hope he's right.
He looks
right.
at the same information, and he sees reason not just to laugh, but he looks at the same information and sees the half full instead of the half empty.
Well,
he sees the collapse of that convoy, and he sees how it can remain stuck in the mud, whereas you and I see the ways that there's still some logic behind it, that they, you know, that they can still get over. He sees, I think if I'm not wrong about this, he sees less of a reason to worry about the nuclear option, even though obviously that's a terrible option and it's possible. He doesn't seem as intimidated by that. Is that fair to say?
Yes,
As people of our generation who grew up in the Cold War?
I'm not.
And that's healthy. That's how the human race works.
Yeah, I'm not intimidated that there's going to be a nuclear war. I'm just saying it's a possibility given Russian military doctrine.
But given how you view that, given what you're willing to do, and one thing the Ukrainian people have done well beyond what most of us thought they'd be willing to do when faced with this invasion.
Right. And I think long term, Alexei's right, because this is the future, you know, what young people want, and including young people in Russia. There have been some surveys that show that the younger generation in Russia is very much against this. This is not comprehensible to them.
Every day I get so much inspiration from the younger generation in our country and worldwide. Among all the terrible things that are happening, like right now in Ukraine, I believe that they're going to lead us to a better world.
Yes,
Before we leave, and thank you so much for coming, anything else, last words you want our listeners to know or do? You're going to send me the, like you can send me the links to post for people to have. Anything else you want us to know as you guys keep leading the world in this battle against authoritarian invasion?
Well, I thank you for inviting us, and I feel that we're very grateful for the support we've gotten thus far from the President, the administration, bilateral, bipartisan support. And I wanted to express that gratitude to our leadership as well as to the American people. We've been getting a lot of calls. People want to know how to help. There is plenty of opportunity to do so. We'd be very happy.
America is united, which is an incredible thing. Who would have thought? Final last word on it?
Thank you so much for inviting me. I fully second Merlin's words about the international support. And I would like to conclude with me saying that it is the most important thing that any American can do at this point is to read only verified sources. Russia has an entire army of disinformation bots on
I've been
Twitter.
shocked at how ineffective
Twitter,
it's
yeah.
been.
Well, a lot of people actually do believe in that, and
Really?
they read Twitter. They don't understand that all of that information is false, that Russia creates those fakes to deceive
Yeah.
people. So please only read verified
And
sources.
if
New
they
York
do-
Times,
if they do
BBC,
knock
State
it out,
Department.
And if they do knock out your ability to send to social media, that is going to be important. But for now, I want everyone to read the Kyiv Independent. We say that for the New Haven Independent, one of the great news sources in Banjo. And Pam says, thanks for all the specific tips. Here's hoping those Russian dudes stay stuck in the mud. So I want to thank Mario and Alexei for coming on Dateline New Haven. Harry Droz, the best station manager in the business. We're all going to pray, and we're also going to open our wallets and our hearts that Ukrainian people fighting our fight right now for freedom and independence. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It'd Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day, all night, all weekend long. WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.